The left tonight salivating over reports that Robert Mueller has the president cornered. They're claiming special counsel has a roadmap leading right to collusion with Russia to win the election. Once again, facts are throwing a little cold water all over that impeachment talk. Just yesterday, the Guardian newspaper reported that former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort met with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange back in 2016. The article claims they met at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where Assange is still holed up, to discuss getting dirt on the Clinton campaign. But here's the problem with that story. The Washington Times is now reporting that Manafort's passport, well, actually, he has several passports, does not have any stamps from a trip to the UK that year. Now, keep in mind, Assange can't leave the embassy, and the Ecuadorians have never said Manafort visited. Democrats are also frothing over another report from CNN, which allegedly shows 2 leaked answers the president gave to Robert Mueller's written questions. In it, the president apparently claims he did not know about the now infamous Trump Tower meeting in 2016, and also claims Roger Stone never told him about the WikiLeaks information on Hillary. But guess what? That's not a bombshell either, because President Trump himself has been tweeting about that in public for over a year. All these reports are apparently annoying the commander-in-chief. This morning, he tweeted, quote, "While the disgusting fake news is doing everything within their power not to report it that way, at least 3 major players are intimating that the angry Mueller gang of Dems is viciously telling witnesses to lie about facts, and they will get relief. This is our Joseph McCarthy era." So, is this proof that there really is a politically motivated witch hunt going on? And are the president's critics getting more desperate? Joining me now, former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski and former deputy campaign manager to Trump, David Bossie. They're the co-authors of the brand new book, Trump's Enemies: How the Deep State is Undermining the Presidency. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about the premise of the book, and that is the deep state working actively against the president. How do you see that manifesting in what we've heard about the Mueller investigation, particularly with Assange and Manafort just in the last couple days?
Well, let me start by saying this. Look, I am no fan of Paul Manafort, but to think that he went to Europe, never got a stamp on his passport, had a secret meeting, never recorded, never happened. And so I think the burden of proof is on the media to prove that Paul was there and not on him to prove he wasn't there.
Yeah, you can't disprove a negative.
No, it's very difficult, but I will say the Ecuadorian embassy has a lot of security cameras. There's a lot of media that cover the comings and goings to meetings of Julian Assange, I think.
How many governments do you think are spying on Julian Assange?
I'm guessing quite a few.
All of them.
Yeah, including our own, I would assume. So I would just believe that if there is any actual evidence to be brought to bear on that particular meeting, we're going to find out about it.
It's interesting because the president could have been spied on. Is that a possibility, given some of the wiretaps and surveillance that we know about? And could that information have been used to set written perjury traps for him?
Well, there's very much a real possibility that the president, as a candidate and as the president-elect, was spied on. And we asked the president in our book, in an interview, do you think that President Barack Obama knew about Crossfire Hurricane, the FBI's insurance policy to stop him from being the president, to spy on American citizens on domestic soil in a violation of the 4th Amendment? And his answer was yes. And moreover, he said, if they would have done this to Barack Obama, it would be called treason, and the people who did it would be in jail for 100 years. But because they did it to Donald Trump, and he was never expected to win the election, they have gotten a pass. And this entire investigation about the Russia witch hunt collusion has been a made-up story from the beginning, perpetrated by Jim Comey, who came up with that false dossier and leaked it to the media to start this hoax.
Well, something is definitely going on, and there's still so many outstanding questions. It feels like we're not going to get satisfactory answers until the Mueller report comes out. But even then, Alan Dershowitz has said that he thinks the document is going to be subjective and damaging to the president politically. Do you agree with that, David?
Well, I'm going to wait and see what the report says. I'm going to wait and see, because the report is going to indicate how this investigation was handled, what the Mueller probe actually went into and what it didn't. Look, we see all the time that the Mueller probe, the people behind it and Mr. Mueller are saying we are following the facts. Well, and evidence. Well, let's see if they follow the facts about who paid for the Russian dossier, how that Russian dossier was perpetrated on the American people. Let's see if he brings any of the reporters in to the grand jury to talk about who in the FBI, who at the Department of Justice leaked that information to those reporters that then used those
those reports.
Articles.
Yes, it was.
They
used
the articles to go to the FISA court to get an application for a warrant to spy on an American individual. It is outrageous. We cannot. I still can't believe that we have a law enforcement agency, the FBI, that was spying on a political adversary.
This
is never seen before.
I can believe that. I mean, I've been seeing this for years.
Kenny, this has never happened.
Those of us who have been saying that the surveillance state has gotten so powerful, so corrupt, and so ripe for abuse that it was only a matter of time before it was politically weaponized.
You are 100% right.
And I think there are people who are outraged out of convenience because they're aligned with the president, but this is something that we have to be mindful of always. I want to talk about Jerome Corsi, and this is one of Roger Stone's associates, because there are a lot of people who think that Roger Stone is the bridge that connects the Trump campaign with Russia. Corsi has been basically handing over documents from the Mueller investigation where he has interfaced to the press. I think it's entertaining. Do you think Corsi is being too open, and could that damage the president?
Look, I can tell you when I was at the campaign, I don't ever think I met Jerome Corsi. I was never there if he had a conversation with Donald Trump, candidate Trump. And whatever his relationship is with Roger Stone or the media is their relationship, and it shows nothing because there was no collusion and he had nothing to do with the campaign.
And I can tell you my time in the campaign, I never spoke to Jerome Corsi, but I didn't even, other than him being a book author, okay, I never knew of his involvement in any way, shape, or form. So I never saw him talk to Steve Bannon or Kellyanne Conway or anyone else, especially the candidate, around us at any time.
Within the deep state, who was the president's biggest enemy?
Well, I would have to say that those enemies were McCabe and Strzok and Page and Comey, the Brennan and Clapper, those folks that you're talking about in a sense of that the intelligence apparatus.
Has the intelligence apparatus changed? Because all those people are gone. So if they were just abusing their power for their own pleasure, they're no longer the problem. Is the system that's in place still set up with the president in the crosshairs?
Well, this president is focused on, and we did a wide-ranging interview that is printed in our book, Trump's Enemies. And I really would like people to read it because we cover a lot of ground. But the president talks about those things that he's trying to put in place to make sure that never happens again.
All right,
and Kennedy, Bruce Orr is still employed by the government.
He
was a senior member of the Justice Department whose wife was Nellie Orr, who worked for Fusion GPS, where this whole thing started. So he is still one of the enemies of the American people and this president.
Corey and David, thank you both so much.